The argument we're making is that there is no solution to the Syria crisis if there isn't a solution to the Iraq crisis. And furthermore, that the solution to the Iraq crisis has an awful lot to do with the resilience agenda. We're very grateful that the organizers did agree to convene a session that was specific to a country. You're probably aware that the other discussions are thematic in nature. We're one of the only roundtables that focuses specifically on one of the countries in the region. And again, that's because this is a very unique and special crisis that we're facing in Iraq that has dimensions of its own and, as I said, impacts very significantly on what is happening more broadly in the region. During this discussion, we hope to reflect together on the many important aspects of the resilience agenda. We've organized the panel in such a way that hopefully those different aspects will come to the fore. The government of Iraq, the minister, His Excellency, will be talking about the scope, the nature, and the impact of the current crisis, focusing on the very dramatic situation facing the more than 4 million internally displaced persons in Iraq and the 250,000 refugees, and the countless communities and institutions which have been struggling to provide assistance and safe haven. Allow me to spend just a moment on that first observation. In Iraq, since ISIL has risen, more than 3.2 million people have been displaced. Already, there were 1 million people that were still displaced from the sectarian violence of 2006 and 2008. That's 4 million displaced people in Iraq. The number of refugees is this big, 250,000. So if you're looking at the resilience agenda in a place like Iraq, you are looking at an agenda that's about the displaced communities. Our colleagues from civil society are going to be describing the recent emergence of the resilient agenda and the steps that the government, the private sector, and civil society are taking and plan to take to promote this most important of agendas. The Kurdistan regional government is going to be describing how the resilience agenda is being used to address the massive humanitarian crisis which has engulfed the Kurdistan region. Kristin will be describing the integrated approach to livelihoods that a consortium of frontline organizations is implementing in hard-hit Kirkuk. UNDP will describe its funding facility for immediate stabilization, which is helping to lay the groundwork for the safe, principled, and voluntary returns of displaced populations into the areas that are newly liberated from ISIL. UNDP will also be describing how international organizations are working under the leadership of the government to support the country's path-breaking and transformative reform program. And then the final part of the session will focus on concrete examples of resilience programming in Iraq. By way of introduction, we hope that you will allow us to offer some framing observations. First, allow us to acknowledge that the resilience agenda is only now just emerging in Iraq. It's not something that we have been focusing on in the early stages of the crisis because the crisis has been so overwhelming and engulfing. As the crisis becomes protracted, however, and it is becoming protracted, we have no choice. We now have to focus on building resilience as quickly as possible. A second observation is that resilience in the case of Iraq is primarily, a point I've already raised, it's primarily about helping the 4 million displaced families, or displaced people, to cope with the crisis, to recover from it, and to become strong enough to deal with whatever may happen in the future. In our national consultations, this is a theme that we spend a lot of time on. We talked about how you help people who are displaced to cope with their displacement, to recover from it, and then most importantly, to help build their resilience so that they are able to deal with whatever crises may happen in the future. A third observation is that the type of programming which we have been doing under the umbrella of the humanitarian operation is, if we are honest, not really resilience programming. This comment is not in any way meant to detract from the important examples that we do have of resilience program, including the kind of integrated livelihoods and social cohesion work that's being done by the Frontline Consortium, which Kristin will be talking about, and which the Humanitarian Pooled Fund has provided support for. It is, however, meant to acknowledge that we need to move very quickly into new types of upscaled programming. This would include things like housing vouchers to help support families that feel that they don't have any option to remain in Iraq any longer because they can't afford the accommodation that we're renting. We're also talking about introducing social vouchers, a form of micro-insurance which will help families to deal with catastrophic events like an unplanned medical emergency. We're also talking about introducing new ways of ensuring that children are able to stay in school. This kind of programming has not been done at scale in our humanitarian work, and we know that it's essential to introduce this as quickly as possible. I will say it is very challenging. Regular humanitarian program is not about housing vouchers, social insurance, and so forth, and yet we know that if we don't start doing that programming now, that there will be hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of Iraqi families who will feel that they don't have any option to remain in their country any longer, that they will have to leave, and above all, we want to stop that. A fourth observation, and it is a painful and a sensitive one, is that the resilience agenda in Iraq is really going to work only if there is funding and support for it. On the question of support, we are confident. Civil society, the government, the international community support the idea and concept of resilience programming. But on the funding front, things are very far from clear. Although the government of Iraq and the Kurdistan regional government have been very generous and supportive of IDPs and refugees, providing cash grants, shelter, free medical assistance, open education, food parcels through the public distribution system, both governments are facing massive, paralyzing fiscal gaps this year. In fact, there are serious questions whether either government will be able to continue the level of support that they have been providing to the countries displaced. On the donor side, we do acknowledge with great appreciation the generous funding that's been provided to Iraq, but we also acknowledge that although Iraq presented the most highly prioritized pared-to-the-bone humanitarian appeal ever launched in the region, funding levels remain shockingly inadequate for one of the world's most complex humanitarian operations, arguably in one of the world's most important geopolitical contexts. For resilience to work in Iraq, the international community, we're hoping, will stand in solidarity with the government of Iraq and the Iraqi people at this most crucial time in the country's history. Allow us to hand over to His Excellency, the Minister of Migration and Displacement, for his observations.
شكرا سيدة ليز. مساء الخير جميعا. طبعا الشكر الجزيل لبرنامج الأمم المتحدة للمائي UNDP صراحة لإدخالهم موضوع الأزمة الإنسانية في العراق لجدول أعمال هذا المنتدى الذي يخص الوضع السوري. أريد أن أختصر حديثي وندع المجال الكافي للنقاش. أولاً، ماذا حل بالعراق؟ صراحة ما حل بالعراق شيء استثنائي. يعني شيء استثنائي بأن يدخل بلد في حرب داخلية مع إرهاب دولي وفي أزمة نزوح خانقة وفي ظل ظروف اقتصادية سيئة جدا. يعني هذه الثلاثة عوامل، حرب، إرهاب دولي، وأزمة اقتصادية، ونزوح أكثر من 3 ملايين، يعني بتصورنا ليس في تحمل أي دولة ما عدا بعض الدول العملاقة القوية التي ربما تتحمل هذه الظروف. لهذا يعني 3 ملايين و300,000 إنسان تحولوا بكافة احتياجاتهم، يعني مع ضرورة تلبية كافة احتياجاتهم تعتبر بالنسبة لنا تحدي كبير، وحتى بالنسبة للأمم المتحدة أصبحت تحدي كبير في كيفية التعامل مع هذا الشعب المتحرك أكثر من 3 ملايين وكيفية معالجة مشاكله. سوف آتي يعني بالتفاصيل عن أننا كيف لم نستطع معالجة كافة يعني مجالات الحياة وكافة مشاكل الحياة بالنسبة للنازحين الداخليين. طبعا عملت الدولة بكل جهودها لإغاثة وإيواء النازحين، ومنذ بداية الأزمة في شهر تموز 2014 شكلت لجنة عليا من كافة الوزارات المعنية لغرض التعامل مع هذه الأزمة. إن أكبر وأهم مشكلة واجهتنا هي كبر حجم النزوح، طبعا ضعف الإمكانات والخبرة أيضا، يعني لم تكن لدى الدولة خبرة في التعامل مع نزوح مليوني، وهذا الشيء طبعا وهذه الخبرة ربما لا توجد في كافة الدول ربما، يعني لأنها صراحة عملية صعبة جدا. ما واجهتنا أيضا قلة التخصيصات المالية، يعني الحكومة لم تكن لديها الإمكانات المالية الكافية حتى ترفض ملف النازحين بالشكل المطلوب، خاصة وأن في بداية الأزمة كنا في مرحلة انتقالية من انتقال دورة حكومية إلى دورة حكومية أخرى، والمشاكل السياسية كانت موجودة بين حكومة إقليم كردستان والحكومة الاتحادية، إضافة إلى تبعات ما بعد الحملة الانتخابية وما بعد احتلال داعش لمناطق واسعة من العراق، إضافة إلى يعني الانهيار الذي حصل للأسف في صفوف الجيش العراقي. لذلك اعتمدنا بالدرجة الكبيرة على أنفسنا وبالصف الآخر باليد الأخرى على الأمم المتحدة، لا سيما ممثلية الأمم المتحدة في العراق ومنظماتها بالأخص UNHCR والIOM طبعا والWFP والWHO وغيرها من المنظمات الدولية ومنظمات الدول والدول المانحة، طبعا إضافة إلى دعم المنظمات المجتمع المدني والجهود الشعبية. يعني الجهود الشعبية بالنسبة للمجتمع المضيف في العراق يعني أفاد النازحين كثيرا، خاصة المراجع الدينية، يعني كافة الأديان والطوائف في العراق شجعت على التقبل أو الاستقبال الاجتماعي للمجتمع المضيف للنازحين، يعني تقبل النازحين من قبل المجتمع المضيف ساعدنا كثيرا، بحيث أن الآن في بياناتنا حوالي 29% من النازحين يعيشون مع عائلة أخرى من غير النازحين، يعني فتحوا بيوتهم لإيواء النازحين. طبعا تمويل الحكومة لملف النازحين في منذ 2014 وإلى الآن إلى هذا الشهر لم تتعدى $1,250,000,000، يعني $1,250,000,000 بالنسبة لأكثر من 3 ملايين نازح، بالنسبة لنا تعد حوالي ثلث الاحتياج الحقيقي، لأن الاحتياج الحقيقي في هذه الفترة تصل إلى حوالي 4 مليار. لذلك كحكومة وكالمنظمات العاملة في ملف النازحين في العراق بصراحة نواجه مشاكل كبيرة، يعني نواجه مشاكل كبيرة في معظم قطاعات وجوانب الحياة بالنسبة للنازحين. أكبر مشكلة تواجهنا هو مشكلة السكن، ونحن لا نخفيكم يعني حائرين في كيفية المعالجة مع هذا والتعامل مع هذا الموضوع. هل نبني بيوت وأحياء سكنية للنازحين؟ هذا مشكلة كبيرة بالنسبة لنا، لأن بناء البيوت أولا يحتاج إلى أموال، ثانيا يحتاج إلى وقت، ثالثا إذا النازح تم إسكانه في منطقة غير منطقته بالتأكيد سوف يبقى ولا يرجع إلى منطقته، وعدم رجوع 3 ملايين، عدم عودة 3 ملايين إلى منطقتهم الأصلية مشكلة جدا كبيرة للعراق، وتغيير ديموغرافي لا يشجعه ولا يريده أي طرف من الأطراف، أي مكون من المكونات في العراق حسب بياناتنا يعيش حوالي 20% من العوائل النازحة في مناطق غير لائقة للسكن، في هياكل أبنية غير مكتملة، في مساجد وحسينيات وأماكن أخرى غير مخصصة للسكن، وهذه نسبة صراحة كبيرة جدا. فقط 13% يعيشون في المخيمات، ووضع المخيمات يعني صراحة جيد نسبة إلى حياة مخيم، ولكن سيء بالنسبة لمواطن تحت في أرضه وفي وطنه أن يعيش في خيمة لا تستطيع أن تقيه من برد الشتاء ولا تستطيع تبريده في الصيف الحار في العراق. حوالي 38% من النازحين يدفعون بدلات الإيجار يعني بالنسبة لحالات السكن، وهذه يعني أثقلت كاهلهم، لأن ادخارهم البسيط الذي أتوا به من منطقتهم يعني نفذ أو في طريقه إلى النفاذ، وذلك لأن فرص العمل بالنسبة للنازحين وبالنسبة للمجتمع المضيف أيضا يعني أصبحت مشكلة بسبب وضع البلد المالي وبسبب انخفاض أسعار النفط. في قطاع التربية أيضا لدينا مشاكل نحاول معالجتها كلها، ولكن حسب بياناتنا أن حوالي نصف الطلبة النازحين لم يستطيعوا الالتحاق بالمدارس، وإن التحقوا بالمدارس بالتأكيد المدارس ليست بالمستوى الكافي، هذا نعرفه، ولكن يعني نصف الطلبة لا يعني عدم التحاقهم بالمدارس هذه مشكلة كبيرة يعني لفئة جدا جدا مهمة اللي هم يعني شباب المستقبل. هناك نقص واضح في الخدمات الصحية، ونقص واضح أيضا في الخدمات يعني الإغاثة الغذائية، لأن برنامج الأمم المتحدة الخاص WFP الخاص بمسألة مسائل المساعدات الغذائية في العراق أيضا تعاني من نقص شديد. الآن لا نريد الخوض والدخول في كافة تفاصيل الأزمة. الأزمة يعني موجودة ومشكلة جدا كبيرة. عن كيفية التعامل مع هذه الأزمة بالنسبة لنا يعني أحد أهم التحديات بالنسبة للحكومة العراقية. في جانب ليست لدينا الأموال الكافية، يعني صراحة الموازنة العراقية الآن بنيت على سعر $45 للبرميل، والإيرادات التي تدخل العراق ربما بهذا السعر وبهذه الكمية من الإنتاج لا تصل إلى أكثر من يعني $50 مليار. 80% من هذا $50 مليار هو فقط رواتب للموظفين، يعني حتى الدولة تستطيع أن تقف على قدمها، وتبقى فقط 20% لكل الأمور الأخرى من ضمنها النازحين. لهذا يعني الوضع المالي بالنسبة لنا لا يساعد بأن الدولة تضخ الأموال الكافية للنازحين، وهذا أحد أهم الأسباب التي ندعو فيه المجتمع الدولي والدول المانحة إلى أن مساعدة العراق إنسانيا حاجة ملحة لإدامة الوضع وللخروج بنتيجة إيجابية. طبعا ربما يعني يسأل سائل لماذا الدول الأخرى أو منظمات المجتمع المدني عليها أو من الواجب الإنساني في هذا الجانب أن تساعد العراق. يعني العراق جزء من مشكلة منطقة، ومشكلة المنطقة جزء من مشكلة العراق، يعني تداخلت المشكلة من ناحية الجيوبوليتيكية، تداخلت المشكلة من ناحية مشاكل الشرق الأوسط، وكلنا مسؤولون عن حل هذه المشكلة. يعني عدم حلنا لمشكلة سوريا وتفاقمها امتدت المشكلة للعراق. جيد، إذا لم نحل المشكلة في العراق من حيث الإرهاب ومن حيث التعامل مع الفعاليات الإنسانية، يعني ما هو الضمان أن لا تمتد هذه المشكلة إلى دول أخرى؟ إذا امتدت المشكلة إلى الدول الأخرى يعني تصبح المنطقة كلها في كارثة. الآن الأزمة الإنسانية في الأردن، في تركيا، في لبنان، وحتى في مصر بالنسبة للاجئين السوريين يعني أزمة جدا كبيرة. دول الاتحاد الأوروبي والولايات المتحدة وغيرها من الدول المعنية يعني لم يحلوا المشكلة السورية في جذورها وفي أراضيها والمشكلة العراقية طبعا أيضا لم يساعدونا بهذا الحل بالشكل المطلوب الجذري. الآن امتدت المشكلة إلى أوروبا، يعني الآن مشكلة اللاجئين بالنسبة لأوروبا مشكلة جدا عويصة وكبيرة، بحيث أن بعض الدول كانت تعاني من 1000 لاجئ مثلا سوري وعراقي، الآن وصلت إليه أكثر من 15,000، وهناك دول بمئات الآلاف استقبلت الناس اللاجئين من هذه الدول. لهذا حل المشكلة في المنطقة هو الحل الجذري، وتعاملنا مع الحالات الأخرى تبقى جزء من معالجة، يعني جزء من معالجة مشكلة كبيرة ويجب الاستمرار بها. الصورة ليست سوداوية كلها في العراق، يعني العراق دولة غنية، العراق بارتفاع سعر النفط وبالاستقرار تستطيع أن تنتعش اقتصاديا وحتى سياسيا وحتى من الجوانب الديمقراطية. يعني مثلا أصبحت لدينا فرصة لإعادة العوائل إلى مناطقها. استطاعت الدولة أن تعيد أكثر من 80,000 عائلة، أي أكثر من يعني حوالي 400,000 نسمة إلى مناطقها الأصلية، وطبعا بمساعدة UNDP والمنظمات العاملة الأخرى. لهذا مساعدة العراق اليوم هو مساعدة للمجتمع الدولي، وبالتأكيد العراق سوف تفي بكافة التزاماتها تجاه هذه المساعدات وننتهي من هذه الأزمة إن شاء الله. أنا لا أريد الدخول في كل التفاصيل التي تهم الموضوع، ولكن أؤكد بأن دعم الأمم المتحدة بالنسبة لنا ضروري، ودعم الدول المانحة ضروري جدا، ودعم دول الجوار أيضا بالنسبة لنا في حل مشكلة الإرهاب ضروري جدا. شكرا.
Excellency, thank you very much. Please allow us to present Dr. Haider, who is His Excellency, the Director General in the Ministry of Planning in the Kurdistan Regional Government.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Kurdistan region is a population of 5 million almost people. And the population of IDPs and refugees is about 1.5. So the increase of population of around 30%, it's a figure, and everyone can sense immediately what happens to a community that increase of 30% of the population in a very short period. Especially the demographical distribution for those people. 62% of the refugees are living within the host community, and 80% of the IDPs within the host community as well. The rest are in the unfinished buildings, some areas, and even in the camps. When we say refugees, in practical and in reality, 97% plus is living in Kurdistan region. So it's just by name. When we say refugee, they are all living in Kurdistan region. So it's quite difficult to look at resilience without knowing some facts. So this impact of this increase of the population, according to the World Bank report, which was conducted at the late 2014, and it has been published early of 2015. It is about impact of the crisis on socio-economic infrastructure in Kurdistan region. I will give some bulletin points. For example, the increase of the unemployment have been from 6.5 to 6.82, the poverty from 3.5 to 8.5, the prices have been increased sharply in some cities, and the trade have been decreased and affected the business in general. In spite of that, Kurdistan have main challenges. We have fighting. It is a unique state. It is a unique with Iraq. Of course, we are sharing the same border with ISIS, about 1,100 kilometers fighting. We are neighboring ISIS in Kurdistan and Iraq. We have a financial crisis due to different reasons. One of them is the lack of understanding so far with the central of Baghdad, and also the oil drop have been affected. Almost more than 50% of the oil drop is the case from prior to the crisis. 5,000 public projects have been suspended or stopped due to the financial crisis. This is all it has real impact on the civil society activities and NGOs and private sector, public services as well. So we can give you tangible examples to understand better. We have been connected to the public electrical net 22 hours prior to the crisis. Now we have 15 hours or 16 hours maximum. And the same for health services have been impacted, for water, sanitation, and whatever infrastructure need and services to the population. Imagine the people we are proud all to, who are fighting at the border with ISIS, Peshmerga, having been paid for the last 3 months. Imagine the person who is Peshmerga fighting ISIS and he hasn't been paid. His thoughts is with his family, with his children, with his due payments, whatever. And we as civil servants also, we haven't been paid from 3 to 4 months in KRG. It's a unique state. It is a unique status to consider. So if we look at the needs, camp management issue. In some areas, the population of the camps are more than a district or sub-district. So managing it is it's a case. Winterization, it's coming, education is at risk, medicine, cholera, wash needs, clean water, all services is in need. So without forgetting humanitarian response to continue, we should give the first priority to humanitarian needs, then to the resilience, because still the people are in need. Otherwise, we will lose some confidence, some programs that should be focused on. But resilience is as a long-term thinking or policy. It's almost a radical solution for a sustainability and long-term to cope, to resist, bring the hope to the people, recover, and to restrong the communities. Well, in our view, we think resilience, it should be our expectation, let's say, because really it is very hard to understand UN language most of the time. Even I have been working for 13 years with UN and NGOs for the terms, for the terminology, for narratives, for so details. So in our understanding, resilience should fall in this way. First, through the host community, we expect resilience will bring development to the stabilization and development to the host community, the origin people, and with institutional development to sustain and to cope and to integrate the power of this nation. In the camps, we much more expect for increase the livelihoods and to give them the hope to return. without giving the hope to return. For the IDPs and refugees, they will be damaging their lives, and psychologically they will be affected. They will be damaged resiliently if they will not give them the hope that they will return one day. Kurdistan region, more than a million of the peoples, we were being all refugee in Iran and Turkey in 91, and we are a good sample in most of the areas in the MENA countries that how the hope make us to return back and rebuild our country and nation. If we come to the newly liberated area, it's one of the area for resilience. We expect resilience. We bring good programs in reconstruction, stabilization, and normalization on those liberated area, because it's very hard to start working on the area that's been liberated. It needs a long-term thinking how we can bring back the life to those areas. Again, there is two major issues that resilience should be focused on through the host community and as a whole, while we are looking to the human. Young people, immigration to Europe. Secondly, I will ask one question for the second one. How you can make a resilience for a family, the daughter of that family have been arrested by ISIS. She has been badly treated to the full extent. And they are thinking about her, where she is now, how she has been dealt, and even for whom they have been returned from after they have been arrested by ISIL. So we have hundreds of the examples of those families. It needs how to make those families cope with the life, how to restore and to be strong again. It needs a good thinking and having a good vision. Well, socioeconomic development is very important to be considered without, because always political drives economy and economy drives politics. So we should cope with that and we focus on economy. The failure of Iraq and Kurdistan region we should admit, because we are always based on the oil revenue. And because of the drop of the oil revenue and because of the trade of oil, we are stuck in having financial problems. If we have been thinking cleverly and more intelligent way how to make alternative and competitive sectors like industry, agriculture, tourism to be a part of the income for the population, creating jobs, we will not be in the same situation as of today. So we have to think about some big changes in the changing of economic policy and income policy. Developing systems and policies, legislations should be also areas to be taken to consideration. Private sector, it's very important for us. I was been 6-year DG at Board of Investment in KRG. I'm just 2 years in Ministry of Planning, almost 2 years plus. For the 6 years, the foreign direct investment and national investments was $40 billion US. Now, the last 2 years, I think it is less than 1 or 2 billion. This is the impact of the crisis about not having the peace and stability to have the investment. We have to increase transparency, fighting corruption, and also to develop the business index, which unfortunately all of that, Iraq is the last 4 or 5th country, the worst from these indicators, especially the business index, we are very low. We have to improve the environment of business to create jobs, to have resilience. The civil society plus media. Media, I think we have to focus more on media. Unfortunately, I didn't see so much about the role of the media in integrating of the knowledges and understandings and whatever related to the transparency issues to the population. let me just check if I have forget one or two last issues. Yeah. Kurdistan region is struggling to have a solid and a valid information. So far, we haven't achieved 50% of that. We haven't a clear, comprehensive registration because of the financial crisis. I hope all UN family, international agencies, international aids, whoever works in the humanitarian and resilience programs for the future will think about how we can complete this registration, comprehensive registration. It is lacking of $2 million. If you don't have information, believe me, and I will say it loudly, that most of the programs will be failure, because if it is not based on the valid information, our status will remain as it is. We have struggling, and we have to cope again and again, and to tune it according to lack of information most of the time. So we should also, resilience should be very smart. It will be smart in simple, measurable, and smart. It will be realistic, not just to have, again, some big documents with the narratives to not to be confused how to make executive summary for implementation. Implementation of resilience should be annexed very quickly to the document, because the people are looking for the implementation and for the what we are doing. At the end, we thank all the donors for providing assistance to the program and international agencies, whoever worked in the field of supporting IDPs and refugees. But again, we have to find a better convincing point how we can attract more donors and they donate more for the program of resilience, and to continue the gap in the humanitarian, which is for the last 6 months we were expecting more. I think Ms. Lise knows about it, and we are suffering all, and too many programs have been affected to that. We as KRG are committing to support, to coordinate. We are proud that so far we have an excellent coordination with all entities working in the field of humanitarian and development in Kurdistan region, all together, and we hope that we integrate as well, or at least to have a healthy communication, much more with the center of to have more exchange of information, and to see where we are and how we can cope all together and recover all together and be strong again and be an asset for everyone. Thank you so much for listening. I wish all the best.
Mr. Director General, thank you very much. Please allow us to ask Kristin from the Danish Refugee Council to talk about the integrated resilience programming in Kirkuk.
I have a small presentation to help walk through this discussion. So if you'll just bear with me 1 minute while we set that up. So first of all, to say thank you to UNDP and our esteemed colleagues on the panel here for organizing this event and giving us an opportunity to share some of the work that's being done in Kirkuk, which of course is a very critical discussion when we're looking at resilience in the context of Iraq. So this presentation focuses on a particular approach to livelihoods and social cohesion that's currently being implemented in Kirkuk, and it also focuses on why Kirkuk was chosen as a target location for this approach. Just to introduce the subject, I would like to present first a minute on the context of livelihoods and social cohesion in Iraq. Overall, countrywide, 42% of the now nearly 4 million internally displaced persons have identified access to income as their top priority need, over access to food, over access to shelter, over access to wash. This indicates for us that there is a high desire among the populations we are looking to work with to access their own needs in a dignified and self-reliant manner. In addition, on the side of social cohesion, approximately 3.2 million members of the hosting community are hosting a displaced population representing over 25% of their local population. Of course, as mentioned by other members of the panel, this puts a strain on the resources, on the services, on the infrastructures available to the community. Given those strains, we've had now information that some members of the hosting community that experience problems with finding employment are more likely to view displaced populations poorly. And this has come out of data of the host community needs assessment that was done by REACH in September. Underneath all of this, we have to recognize that in Iraq, there's a complex fabric of historical social tensions that might ignite if these underlying economic vulnerabilities and pressures are not well addressed. But however, given the huge needs countrywide, which I think we all recognize quite well, we have a limited number of resources and capacity to respond. And because of this, as the Emergency Livelihoods and Social Cohesion Cluster partners, we went through an exercise of trying to prioritize our response in Iraq. Through this prioritization exercise, we came to Kirkuk as a pilot area for this integrated approach to livelihoods and social cohesion. I won't go into a lot of details on this study, but I'm available afterward to speak on it. We did a small study with UNDP and the Livelihoods and Social Cohesion partners on the underlying triggers of social conflict. What drivers in the community might indicate a likelihood of social conflict? As a result of that study, which included nationwide data from pre-crisis and during crisis district-level analysis, we looked at trends in unemployment, in poverty rate, in ethnic and religious mapping, in perceptions between different groups, and overlaid that with data on social conflicts and social tensions reported amongst the community. As a result of this, the two main findings of this study were that locations which had a high level of pre-crisis poverty have an increased likelihood of social conflict when under the strain of hosting large numbers of displaced populations. In addition, what was interesting is that we found in areas where you have a near equal balance of two ethnic or religious groups, you have a higher chance of social conflict in comparison to other areas where you might have a smaller group and a more dominant group. So in these cases, when you have a balance, the two groups might feel empowered to a certain extent, and it increases the likelihood of a social conflict. Through this exercise, there were a number of key areas in Iraq that were identified as high priority. One of those is being Kirkuk. So Kirkuk has a very diverse population, which we all recognize as a humanitarian community, and it also means that the hosting community has a unique number of strains from the displaced populations. So I just wanted to illustrate this graph quickly. It represents populations in need of emergency livelihoods and social cohesion support in Kirkuk. You can see that between March and October 2015 alone, that population has increased by over 200,000 individuals. So we're talking about large numbers of increased populations in needs in fairly short spans of time in an area that prior to the crisis was also economically vulnerable. By the way, this includes both host populations that are economically vulnerable and displaced populations. When we're speaking of livelihoods and social cohesion, we look a lot at economic vulnerability, regardless of the type of population which we're referring to. As a result of this exercise and of recognizing the needs in Kirkuk, 3 partners were supported through the Iraq Humanitarian Pooled Fund, the IHPF process, to target Kirkuk with an integrated package of support for livelihoods and social cohesion. Currently, this intervention is being implemented by Relief International, REACH, which is a local NGO, and the Danish Refugee Council. We're directly targeting 6,000 individuals. Prior to the start of these programs in September and October this year, there were no active livelihoods agencies engaged in Kirkuk. Although we are limited a little bit by the funding cycle, which is a time frame of 6 months, the partners really believe that they can make an impact at the community level through this program. Currently, the programs are targeting the urban and peri-urban areas of Kirkuk, Dibs, and Dakuk districts. And we have in terms of activities, it's a community-led identification of micro or small projects, such as cleaning of parks, painting of schools, supporting public health facilities, which we then have a cash for work program for IDPs and host community households to participate in to support these community-identified micro projects. Through the course of the program, each participating household participates in about 1 month of cash for work activities. And at the rate of $20 per day, it's a total cash transfer value per household of $400. And again, this is targeting economically vulnerable hosts as well as displaced populations. It's very important to mention that the project focuses on a conflict analysis and a do no harm approach, recognizing the diversity of the communities in Kirkuk and the strains of displaced populations. We think it's very critical to recognize the conflict dynamics and make sure we're not doing harm by trying to do better programming. So far, although we haven't had too many results to report since it's just started up, we can say that the approach has been very well welcomed and supported by the local stakeholders, hosting communities, and displaced communities. We've had a lot of support from the local government structures in Kirkuk to get this project started, and a lot of buy-in from the community. I have also printed out a small briefing paper on Kirkuk and this approach, and it's on that table there for you if you'd like to pick it up on the way out. Mainly because I don't want to go too much into this diagram, but just to say that the integrated approach to livelihoods looks at the household level and the community level and the overlap that becomes the social impact between the two. So through this approach, we are hoping that our livelihoods interventions, complemented with the social cohesion, can improve the shared community assets, reduce strain on public services. It develops community ownership for the projects. By having community-led project teams, we also build the capacity of community and civil society organizations. And over time, communities become less reliant on external support. We also have a gender and youth component of the program, so that's empowering over the long run. And we really hope that this interlinkage in the longer term builds a bit of social coexistence and that it can support resilience and future opportunities for households as they decide what to do in the coming months. So far, in terms of opportunities and challenges, the short project timeframe gives us a bit of limitation in terms of our longer-term social impact, but we are still convinced that it can have an impact in this particular timeframe. Of course, the targeting versus the population in need has become difficult given the huge range of needs in Kirkuk. As I said, it's almost 400,000 people in need versus 6,000 targeted in this program. The involvement of women and youth in shorter-term interventions is particularly difficult as it relies on a strong relationship with the community and building that level of trust. So although we are engaged with women and youth, I think in a longer program we could do this much more effectively. We have so far a limited impact in terms of transferable skill building. When we talk about resilience, we want to be working on skills now that help people in the future. This program helps households meet their immediate needs and build some level of social stability, but it doesn't necessarily build skill sets which these households will then use in the future. And this links to the challenges and both opportunities to transition into sustainable livelihoods. As mentioned also by some other members of the panel, we need to develop further our linkages to the private sector, as well as how to support handing over to the government some of the public works and services activities that these types of cash for work programs support. Another one just to mention is that we would really like to stress that the supporting factors which enable social cohesion, such as the legal framework and legislative policies that diffuse tensions and conflict, as well as facilitate equal access to populations, need to be strengthened in order to maximize the impact of this type of an intervention. And that's all from my Kirkuk presentation. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Kristin. If you allow us just to observe that for colleagues who are not familiar with Kirkuk, Kirkuk is arguably one of the most sensitive areas in all of Iraq. It is a disputed territory. 1 out of every 4 people who lives in in Kirkuk is displaced. It has some of the highest levels of violence and tension. And it was for that reason that we decided to go into Kirkuk and do the kind of very innovative resilience programming that Kristin has been talking about. It's a consortium of NGOs. It's led by the Danish Refugee Council. It's supported by the Iraqi Pool Fund, which has been capitalized by DFID, by the British government. We could have taken an easier decision and started resilience programming in an area that wasn't sensitive. but we recognized that it was resilience programming, because of its unique nature, because of its focus on social cohesion, that this was precisely the kind of programming that was necessary to deal with an area as sensitive as Kirkuk. So Kristin, thank you so much for presenting that. If we may please invite Dr. Intisar, who is a leading member of the League of Iraqi Women.
مساء الخير. راح أحاول أركز في مداخلتي على دور النساء. أدى العنف الدائر في العراق جراء الحرب مع داعش منذ ما يقارب العام والنصف وما سبقها من عمليات إرهابية ونزاعات داخلية وانتشار واضح للميليشيات والجماعات المسلحة إلى تراجع شديد في إنجازات التنمية البشرية في العراق والعودة به إلى الوراء بعشرات السنين. في مرحلة هي الأشد قسوة على العراقيين نساء ورجال، إذ تشير التقارير إلى نزوح أكثر من 3 ملايين وتدفقهم داخليا وإلى الدول المجاورة للحصول على الحماية والأمان من الحروب المتواصلة مع الإرهاب، بالإضافة إلى أكثر من 5000 مختطف بين نساء وفتيات وأطفال لا يعرف مصيرهم حتى الآن، فضلا عن آلاف المفقودين والمفقودات، مع نقص كبير في الملاذات الآمنة والخدمات الأساسية تبعها هجرة المزيد من الشباب ومن كلا الجنسين. كما أن عدم كفاية الخدمات في مجالات الصحة والتعليم والصرف الصحي والإسكان والبنى التحتية الاجتماعية والاقتصادية، فضلا عن انهيار الفرص الاقتصادية وزيادة التنافس على فرص العمل المتاحة، أدى إلى تفاقم أوجه الحرمان، وبدأت التوترات المتصاعدة جراء ذلك من تهديد التماسك الاجتماعي وسيادة القانون، مما يتطلب اتخاذ إجراءات استثنائية وآليات عمل جديدة تعمل على مواجهة الأزمات والتعافي منها والخروج بحلول ناجعة تساعد المجتمعات المتضررة في العراق على التعامل مع الأزمة وإعادة بناء مكتسباتها الإنمائية وإنعاشها وحمايتها، على سبيل المثال عن طريق توفير فرص عمل مؤقتة للمتضررين وإزالة الأنقاض ومساعدة الأنشطة التجارية المحلية على استعادة أصولها المنتجة وتحسين البنى التحتية لها، وإعطاء دفعة للفرص الاقتصادية المحلية وتوفير فرص العمل، ولا سيما للفئات المستضعفة أو المتضررة مثلا الشباب والنساء والمعاقين. لا يمكن لهذه المجتمعات وفي العراق تحديدا أن تتعافى أو أن تتقدم بمعالجات جذرية دون مساهمة النساء وإعطاء أهمية أكبر لدورهن وإشراكهم في مراحل صنع واتخاذ القرارات المتعلقة بالمفاوضات وحل النزاع ومنع استمراره وصناعة الاستقرار الأمني وبناء السلام. فللنساء والشباب دور لا يمكن إغفاله أو التغاضي عنه، خصوصا في هذه المرحلة، والعمل على بناء قدراتهم لاستيعاب صدمة الكوارث والأزمات السياسية والإرهابية واستعادة قدرتهم على مواجهتها والتعافي منها، بما يضمن عراق معافى آمن ومستقر. هنا علينا أن نؤكد على أهمية بناء شراكات حقيقية بين القطاع الحكومي وغير الحكومي والقطاع الخاص، بما يمكن أن يحقق الاستقرار الاجتماعي والاقتصادي والذي يعد الأساس للتنمية والسلام بعيد الأمد. أن دور المجموعات النسائية مهم في تطوير السياسات المبنية على التعاطي مع الأزمات والتعافي منها، لما توليه من اهتمام بأوضاع النساء والفتيات النازحات في مختلف أنحاء العراق ومدنه، سواء في الوسط أو في الجنوب أو حتى في إقليم كردستان. وأن العراق يمتلك خطة وطنية لتنفيذ قرار 1325، وهذه الخطة وضعت أساساً بمبادرة من المنظمات النسوية ومساهمة فعالة منها في كل ما يتعلق بخطة حقيقية قابلة للتنفيذ، لكن ما ينقصنا هو الإرادة السياسية وتكاتف الجهود للخروج من مأزق العراق الحالي أمنياً واقتصادياً، خصوصاً وأن الحكومة العراقية أعلنت حالة من التقشف وهذا بحد ذاته تحدي يحتاج إلى دراسة اقتصادية مدروسة بالإضافة إلى إدارة حكيمة لمحاربة الفساد. من جانب آخر عملت المنظمات النسائية على إعداد خطة طوارئ معنية بالنساء والفتيات النازحات، تبعها إقرار حكومي وتشكيل غرفة عمليات لمراقبة التنفيذ، لكن سرعان ما تم إلغاء الشريك الرئيسي في مراقبة وتنفيذ الخطة وهو وزارة الدولة لشؤون المرأة، تلاها إخفال متابعة تنفيذ الخطة وترك الأمر على حاله دون مظلة أو إطار بديل للتنسيق ومتابعة العمل. شكرا.
And finally, we're delighted to welcome Dr. Abdelmoula, the country director for UNDP, who will be talking about the UNDP's stabilization facility and our support to the reform program. Ad.
Well, since I'm not a minister of DG, I think I should stand here and talk to you from here, from the podium. And also, I don't want to make a long speech or a PowerPoint presentation. I want to share with you 4 points. Only. My first point is about resilience and how it could be done. Resilience cannot be externally driven. We, as members of the international community, can contribute to it, can facilitate, and can perform certain actions. Leadership and ownership have to remain with the national government and with the national actors. And for resilience to take place and for resilience activities to be implemented, we need political will and we need the national actors to take the lead. Now, we have to remember in Iraq that several attempts have been made, especially during the US occupation, to reform institutions. Billions of dollars, some would say trillions, were spent on reform activities, from building a new army to building new state apparatus to doing so many other activities. None of them stuck. We have to remember that the army disappeared, okay, when attacked in Mosul. So certain actions can only be performed at the national level and nationally owned and nationally driven, and resilience is one of those. Second, for the resilience to succeed, it needs a strong political will. For the first time in the post-occupation era of Iraq, we sense that there is a genuine political will on the side of the Iraqi leadership to push forward with certain reforms that will make this resilience agenda possible to implement inside Iraq. Now, let us demystify the reforms that people keep talking about. What are they about? Let me give some examples. First, on the top of the agenda, or the reform agenda of the current government, is this issue of the implementation of Law 21, which basically seeks to devolve the powers of 8 central ministries to the government level. So greater devolution. I believe greater devolution of power in any country means bringing the government closer to the people and empowering local administrations to act as the direct conduit for the delivery of services and for democratization in the long run. That is something that I think is most welcome and will make the building and the implementation of the resilience agenda more possible, because you have a partner who is highly localized, who deals with the people on a daily basis, who is in charge of the delivery of services. Another part of the reform agenda has to do with combating corruption and reducing government expenditure. That is fraught with so many challenges. There are people from within the government who are against that. There are political blocs who are lining up against this particular initiative of cutting costs and reducing the size of government and all of that. But this is an essential ingredient of making resources available and also for adapting to the oil price crunch and the downturn of the national economy. A third element of the reform package is national reconciliation. And I think it is a long overdue undertaking in Iraq. This is something that has or should have been pursued immediately after the downfall of Saddam Hussein or shortly thereafter, for a combination of reasons. Iraq never managed to have a proper reconciliation program that would sort out so many grievances that date back many decades. And unless a true and genuine national reconciliation that is not only top-down, not another deal among the elites, but a genuine social reconciliation that takes the form of social cohesion at the bottom level and goes up and also goes from the top down. Unless that kind of undertaking is mounted, we will see a much weaker Iraq that is on the verge of collapsing. So I think the Prime Minister's team and the government right now demonstrated the political will by prioritizing national reconciliation. Again, these are all reform attempts. They have yet to materialize, but they all indicate that the political will is there. And that for the first time, there is an opportunity for all of us to act together and support these reform initiatives. And maybe by doing so, we will pave the way for the institutionalization of genuine and long-lasting resilience agenda. Now, in all of this, there is a special case to be made for Kurdistan, Iraq. This is a region that, for a combination of factors, for 2.5 decades have been relatively stable and prosperous, and had made some giant strides forward in terms of stability, peace, infrastructure building, and you name it. Those hard-won development gains are under serious threat of being reversed because of the so many factors that God has enumerated, and there is no need for me to repeat them. But foremost among them is that if you take the number of refugees and IDPs that have been hosted by KRG, they are by far the highest in the entire sub-region that we are talking about. Let's say, if you take the number of refugees relative to the number of the population in Jordan, or in Lebanon, or in any other country, and you compare that with the number of refugees and IDPs relative to the local population in Kurdistan, Kurdistan is by far higher in that regard. And so that is a real threat, combined with dropping oil prices and the war effort against ISIL and the tension between Baghdad and Erbil that doesn't allow the flow of money as needed and so on. All of that poses a serious threat that this hard-won development could be reversed, and that would be a catastrophe that could lead to further population movements, not to inside Iraq, but most likely to abroad, to other places. Now, let me just quickly say what is it that we are doing as UNDP in the face of all of this. Some quick examples. We started in the liberated areas by having the stabilization program. What is it? First of all, it is a government-led program that has a steering committee that includes representatives of major donors. So we ensure that it is government-led, it is nationally owned. Second, it targets the period of 30 to 90 days after an area has been declared by the national authorities to be liberated. In other words, this is not a reconstruction program. This is not an attempt to resolve everything that needs to be taken care of. It is an attempt to make it possible for the IDPs to return to a safe environment that has a minimum basic level of services that will enable them to rebuild their lives. And third, it has 4 components. First and foremost, is light infrastructure rehabilitation, and we did that. Restoration of water, power grids, removing rubble, refurbishing the clinics and health facilities, police stations, government buildings, and so on. We did that, and a prime example is the Crete. And the second component is to enable the local administration to discharge its functions, even if at a very minimal and basic level, by facilitating it to have government officials return to the area, the police station to function, and the local administrators to resume their functions. That's the second component. The third is to jumpstart the local economy through a combination of activities. First, microcredit grants for people to re-establish their kiosks or bakeries or fruit and vegetable stores and so on. And the second is through cash for work schemes, especially for the youth, to do rubble removal and take care of some basic infrastructure needs of the community. And the last but not least is the social cohesion component, which seeks to resolve disputes among the returning IDPs and whoever remain there, and to see to it that the basic elements of peaceful coexistence among the communities is restored. And so those are the four elements of stabilization. We can talk more about stabilization for those who are interested much more later. Another program that we have from the onset of the crisis in Iraq, UNDP led the livelihoods and social cohesion cluster in the UN humanitarian architecture, but we also had UNDP's own resilience program, which is trying to achieve a combination of goals. First, assisting host communities through a rapid expansion of the social services, that is schools, water, water facilities, and educational facilities, and whatever we can do to make the IDPs and refugees less of a burden on the host communities. And the second element is livelihoods. How do we make the IDPs and refugees less dependent on international handouts? How do we make them productive members of the community? And that's the income and employment generation component. Again, this is a program about which we can talk much more. A third program is to work with the national parliament, and in particular in two aspects. First, to strengthen its oversight role, because in a democracy, the parliament has to be the watchful eye of the people over the executive and all the other actors. And so how do we ensure that the parliament discharges that role as it should in a functioning democracy? The second is how to make the legislative process that parliament is undertaking more accessible to the civil society. How do we ensure that the civil society has a voice in the legislative process? And that program has been ongoing, and now it is in its second phase. And then we have the local area development program, which is an innovation of UNDP Iraq. Now it is being emulated in many other places. Most remarkably, the colleague who worked on it in Iraq is now exporting it to Africa, and there are at least two places in Africa that have already started local area development programs similar to the one that we have in Iraq. The idea about local area development is similar in a way to what the government is advocating for here through Law 21, which is to devolve the development agenda to the governorate level, to have a development plan that is locally led at the governorate level and is overseen by the provincial council, articulated locally, locally owned, locally funded, and locally implemented, with assistance from UNDP. And we have done that. One prime example that Lise signed was the Basra Compact that we wanted to use as a model elsewhere in the country. I mentioned what we are doing in Karji. I will spare you the rest of the stuff that UNDP Iraq is doing, but I will say a few words about our partnerships. We have solid partnerships with the private sector that we are seeking to expand. UNDP played a pivotal role in rolling out the national private sector strategy that was launched by the Prime Minister himself. There is a lot of work that needs to be done in that regard. We have just scratched the surface. But we have also included in the private sector area for our work partnerships with international oil companies, and one example of that is our partnership with Shell that seeks to use Shell's corporate social responsibility funds to benefit the communities where oil is extracted. With civil society, we are in a much advanced stage. Now, that brings me to my last point, my fourth point, and that is the role of the international community. In Iraq, we don't need the money of the international community only. In Iraq, we need the goodwill and the voice of all the major international actors. This is a very critical moment in the country's history. There are neighbors who have their own wars to fight, and unless those interests and those wars are kept away from meddling in Iraq's future, I don't think this instability that we see in Iraq is going to end very soon. That's one aspect. Second aspect is that we need the donors to make a strategic investment. Investing in the resilience agenda inside the country is a smart investment, because if you don't do that investment, as we said back in 2012 in Syria, you will end up spending more money on those people when they become refugees in your own country. So it's a smart business move to invest on resilience inside these countries, rather than spend more when these people become a public charge on you when they come to your borders. And finally, I think there is hope today in Iraq more than ever before. And I think we all need to capitalize on this hope. And a state that has existed for 7,000 years shouldn't be so hard to resuscitate and rebuild. But we need to seize this moment all and invest, and resilience is a good entry point for that. Thank you.
What we had hoped to do in this session was to talk about the emerging resilience agenda in Iraq, and to focus on how we're trying, through the humanitarian program that Kristin described, to focus on helping displaced populations to cope with the current crisis, to recover from it, and to become strong enough to be able to address whatever happens to them in the future. We also wanted to be very clear about describing how we're trying, through the resilience agenda, to support what the government is doing, the reform agenda, recognizing that the reform agenda is a mechanism for helping to ensure that the country is able to cope with this current crisis, to recover from it, and then to be strong enough so that it can fight the battle against ISIL and emerge triumphant. We see resilience in both of those terms. Please allow us to express our gratitude to His Excellency the Minister for describing the scope of the crisis that we're facing, to His Excellency the Director General, who described the steps that are being taken right now to build resilience, to Kristin's presentation about humanitarian programming, focus on building the resilience of displaced populations, to Dr. Intisar, who talked about the unique role that women in Iraq are playing in this agenda, and then finally to Dr. Adam, who talked about the way in which the international community is standing in solidarity through the UN agencies with the government of Iraq as it works to cope, recover, and then build back stronger. We're very interested in your comments and reflections, and the floor is open for any observations. If colleagues will allow, we'll take 3 questions in round. Sir. Or you can just interject.
Thank you. My name is Refugee. I am the country director of Grande, the Swedish organization in Kurdistan region. I could not agree more with the representative from the UNDP. Thank you for your comments. I just have a comment and then followed by a question. The comment is, when we look at the regional, since this session is about the regional crisis and then resilience in Iraq, when we look at Kurdistan region specifically, we see a very scary pattern. And the pattern is that we have 250,000 Syrian refugees in Kurdistan region. We have about 12,000 refugees from Turkey in Kurdistan region. We have 1,500 refugees from Iran in Kurdistan region. And we have a very large number of IDPs in the Kurdistan region, all of whom happen to be Kurdish. Okay? Now, this is a scary pattern in that it shows us the failed policies of certain governments towards their own citizens. Okay? For example, we have Kurdish refugees who are now in Kurdistan region because Turkey refuses to grant the rights of these people. In Iran, the same thing. The Iranian government refuses to provide some of the basic rights of these people. Syria was a result of that. Iraq was also a result of the failed policies of the central government in Baghdad, who was not able to protect its own people. And as a result, they failed in the hands of ISIS. They became IDPs and so on. How do you think we can get this political will that the gentleman from UNDP was referring to from the member states in order for this strategy to be really resilient, when there's so much resistance from the governments themselves? Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we had a point, sir.
السلام عليكم معالي الوزير وسيد حيدر والأخوة الحضور. Today I'm going to speak in English. Actually, we are 3 participants from Iraq representing the private sector. Among us is Mr. Amjad Jabur, who sits next to me. He was the chairman of Baghdad Chamber of Commerce, and he has many activities in resolving many crises in Iraq. And I think we will give him a chance to give a point of view and his vision regarding Iraq. Ms. Lise, I have 2 comments about what you say about Iraq. Your presentation is very nice and accepted by us, except 2 points. That you say there is violence in Kirkuk, which is not, and I'm sure that Kirkuk is a stable area and everybody can go there and activities are going on. One more thing, Iraqis will remain in Iraq. There will not be immigrant to Europe or anywhere. And Iraq will stand very short in case that will be terrorist free. Thank you very much. And I just requested you to give the mic to Mr. Amjad Jaburi to be there in order to give his point of view. Thank you.
السلام عليكم. وفي الحقيقة أنا أحيي السيد الوزير والأخوة العراقيين والمتكلمين الآخرين. Really, I'd like to say something, but not everything, because my colleagues and other speakers, they commented and explained. They speak more details about the subject, whereas they neglected the thing how to find a remedy for this problem. We have to think all the time the cause and effect. What is the cause of this problem, and what is its effect, and how do we try to cure it? But if we try to speak only in details about what's happening all over the world, all the people, they know what's happening in Iraq, and the government nowadays is not able to do something, not because of disability, no, but because of the environment and circumstances in Iraq. It is very difficult for the government only to do everything, but also our people, volunteers, also carrying arms in order to defend our country all over the country. There is no difference between the people in the north and in the south. Iraq is Iraq from the north point to the south point, from the borders of Turkey to the borders of Kuwait. That's Iraq. And as we come here, we don't try to say something about country, but I try, because I am representative of private sector, I try how to can we distribute in doing such a thing. In our point of view, that we speak about our country, about the average of aid, the average of income, and these things are very important because the average of age nowadays in Iraq is 66, and the income is very low really. We speak also about electricity and water, whereas we have two big rivers, Tigris, Euphrates, and now we are in need for water. Why? Because of Turkey all the time try to make us unable to make use of the very little quantity of the water supplied to our country. Also, if we try to speak about the activities of the government, it is 10%, and also in getting the laws and economies, we say, it is 15%. I'd like to speak about the economical organization. It should be equal. There is no difference between one from another, because sometimes we see that one of these organizations is held by the government, whereas other economical organizations are in need for more support from the government. This is a case that makes all of us that we are unable to help and unable to other people look to the government that is in the best way. The best way for the government is to help the citizens, and they believe that it's their country and they have to defend it, and this is what is done in Iraq. All the people are defending their country. It is the responsibility of any honest person, and this is Iraq. It is of 7,000 years of culture and civilization. We are proud of our country, really, but we try to say something about some of the problems. The problems really are in communication, electricity, water, banks, insurance, and also transportation, many other things. But what to do now? We have to make a balanced economy. That's to say, it will help us to need not what we get from petrol. Why? I asked some of those, the chairman of some other countries, such Kuwait, I asked them about their income from petrol. They told me that they keep their money outside their country, abroad, in Europe, and to make investment. And the income of or profits from these money in these countries, they can live even if the petrol will stop and will end. This is our mistake. Now, all the income we get in our country, it will be spent, and there's no time to say when, how, and where it's spent. This is really a bad thing, and we don't like to go ahead on such a thing. The private sector should be given the priority, and it should be the leader of the society. Why? Because we believe in economy market. Economy market, it means that everything is to the rich man and to the businessman. The businessman should lead. Whereas we find that some of the committees that's done by the government or funds that we can see from private sector, 2%, and from the government, 6 or 8%. I am looking at me, it means I have to end, but please, I like to say one thing only, that you really you don't make us equal to other people. Why? Because private sector in Iraq is very important, whereas no one is sitting on the stage in order to say something. And I don't try to blame or say something, but I'd like to thank you very much.
I believe we have a gentleman here. We'll take these and then we'll come here, I promise. I promise. This gentleman has been asking right from the start if we have a microphone. There we go. I promise to come here next.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vesalayan. I am here from Turkey. I want to ask Ms. Catherine, before the start of program in the Kirkuk, did the project staff receive any training program about the sectarial, ethnical, and tribal conflict in the Kirkuk? Because I am more than 15 years I am working to the Iraq and Syria issue, and so without the information about the sectarial and tribal and the ethnical conflict, how you can carry out the project. So it is one of the main issues. And the second issue about livelihood programs, and we have any feedback about livelihood program, for example, how many people get the long-term jobs regularly after they finalize his programs? Thank you very much.
If colleagues allow, we'll take 3 more questions and then we'll have a final set of responses from our... Sir, please.
My name is Dr. Anwar Abdullah. My specialty is sustainable development, which is about total solution. I am a senior advisor to the Federation, Kurdistan Federation of Chamber of Commerce. And I have a few comments, please. What is shaping the ill situation now in Iraq and the whole of Middle East is 3 dangerous threats. The first is ISIS. The second one is the $40 oil, and the third is climate change. Nobody talk about climate change here. When you talk about economy, please, I think private sector should be here. What you are dealing with here is all about the breaking down of the socio-economic factor. So it is more close to the private sector, to the market, than to the government. My comment is, please avoid any disk solution, top-down approach for the solution. We have to also deal from bottom up as well. I hope to give to add my voice to the gentleman that you have also to listen to the private sector according to the principle of participatory approach. Else, how you are going to make awareness and social responsibility among the private sector. For example, in Erbil, we just started with UNDP, listing top 20 companies, talking to them, aware them about their social responsibility. So to engage them later in this, what we call it, crisis management. Thank you.
And I believe we have Madam in the back, Madam, and then Irfan in the front, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Williams. I'm a journalist. I just want to follow on from this gentleman's question. Looking to the example of Kirkuk, where there is a long and complex history of layers of displacement and tribal issues and sort of population challenges that have come from the top down at one point, is there an interest or is there any appetite or funding to go beyond kind of the immediate resilience and funding and supporting people from this more immediate conflict and look to some of these root causes, the people who, you know, their grievances are 50 years old, but those grievances fester, and perhaps it wouldn't be too much to say that those grievances are being compounded. So that's the question, is there interest in dealing with that?
Thank you, and you have Madam.
أنا محامية ابتسام الشمري، رئيسة جمعية المرأة لخير المرأة من العراق. الحقيقة بداية نحن نشكر الدكتور آدم على عرضه لعمل UNDP في العراق، لكن نتمنى أن يركز العمل مع منظمات المجتمع المدني محليا أكثر من تركيزه على الحكومة، ذلك لأن الدوائر الحكومية معظمها، لا نقول جميعها، لا هنالك تعميم، معظمها فيها الفساد الإداري، وأن المساعدات أو الدعم قد لا يصل إلى النازح مباشرة. لذلك نتمنى أن يكون التعاون مع منظمات المجتمع المدني أكثر من الحكومة. العراق الحقيقة يحتاج إلى تدخل من كافة مكاتب الأمم المتحدة وليس فقط UNDP، لأن هنالك كثير من الاحتياجات للنازحين، منها الخدمات العامة اللي معروفة ما أريد أتطرق لها الآن، لكن الأهم من كل هذه الخدمات هو تصريف المياه الصحي، لأنه المجاري الآن مسدودة في العراق، وللأسف هذه المجاري من انسدت وانسدت الشوارع وانسدت المدن وغرقت كلها، غرقت أيضا المخيمات النازحين، والخيم كلها سقطت بالأرض، وكان هنالك يعني خسائر مادية ومعنوية وبشرية بالنسبة للنازحين اللي في المخيمات أثناء الغرق اللي كان في الأسبوع الماضي. لذلك يعني أحب تركزون على موضوع المجاري قبل كل شيء، وهنالك أيضا احتياجات لفتح مشاريع صغيرة للنازحين، وأخص بالذكر النازحات، لأنه الحقيقة هم المخيمات النازحين معظمها نساء وأطفال، لأن الرجال إما أنه يقاتلون وإما أنه يعني يستشهدوا، فلذلك يكون التركيز على النساء لتأهيلهن أولا، ثم فتح مشاريع صغيرة لهن حتى يكون هنالك مورد للعائلة. ونحتاج أيضا إلى توعية للنازحين في المخيمات، داخل المخيمات، لدمجهم مع المجتمع المضيف. كذلك نحتاج إلى توعية للمجتمع المضيف عن كيفية احتضان هؤلاء اللاجئين أو النازحين، لأن أحيانا يكون هنالك اختلاف في المذهب أو في الدين يؤثر أحيانا على علاقتهم مع بعض، فنحتاج إلى ورش توعية وجلسات لدمج هؤلاء مع بعض. شكرا.
UN Habitat Iraq. Two questions. First question to the UN. Dr. Adam concluded by investment in resilience. Do we consider now developing a comprehensive resilience plan as UN? The second question to the federal and to the regional government of Kurdistan. How do we consider an enabling role for the local authorities and municipalities as a front line to enhance resilience or community resilience? We mentioned the law number 21. Do we consider any innovative tools, municipal financing, any other tools in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, we're coming toward the end of this session. So if colleagues allow, we'll start with Dr. Adam, make our way through the panel for any final observations, concluding with His Excellency. Adam.
This one I will take well city. Just quick comments about the refugees and the refugee problem in Kurdistan. I want to respond to that by making two observations. First, it's not only Kurds from neighboring countries, Turkey, Syria, and Iran that flocked to Kurdistan. It's over 1 million Iraqis from the rest of Iraq also flocked to Kurdistan. Why? Because of peace. The area is peaceful. Okay? And that is what attracted the people. Not the fact that this is a Kurdish region or anything relating to the political situation there. It is the fact that this is a region that has been relatively peaceful, and people felt that their families would be safe in that region, and that's why they went there. With regard to the rest of the question, the political decisions made by neighboring countries about the way to treat their Kurdish communities, I am afraid that that question has to be addressed by those member states themselves, not by the United Nations. Now, another speaker, my friend here, talked about the fact that Iraqis will remain in Iraq. I wish that that's the case. Now there are more than 3 million Iraqis living in 80 different countries, and the number is increasing. So we have to approach this rather strategically to ensure that they do in fact stay in their country, because this hemorrhage of educated people, the cream of the crop, leaving the country has been going on since the times of Saddam Hussein, and it never stopped. Now the country is being drained of its best trained personnel, and that has to stop. And it's part of the resilience again. I find you raised a very important point, but I think that's an issue for the RC. I wouldn't speak on her behalf. On behalf of UNDP, I want to say we are ready to work with the entire UN country team on the implementation of the resilience program.
Dr. Intisar?
ما كان في سؤال جاوب عليه، بس أنا عندي توصية. أنه ضرورة المجتمع الدولي إلى ضرورة ملحة الآن في حث الحكومة الاتحادية والإقليمية على ضرورة توحيد الجهود لخلق إرادة سياسية قوية قادرة على تبني برنامج شراكة حقيقي بين القطاع الحكومي وغير الحكومي، أي منظمات المجتمع المدني والقطاع الخاص، على تبني سياسة حقيقية وملموسة ضمن برامج مشتركة تنفذ على أرض الواقع لتحقيق الاستقرار الاجتماعي والسياسي والاقتصادي والأمني. يعني الأزمة اللي نعيشها حاليا نلاحظ أنه المجتمع الدولي صراحة إحنا كمنظمات مجتمع مدني لما نراقب أنه صمت المجتمع الدولي اتجاه ما يحدث بالعراق، في حين اللي يحدث بالعراق هو أسوأ مما يحدث في سوريا. شكرا.
Maybe just for my closing remarks, I'll respond to the comments on Kirkuk and particularly on livelihoods. Just to mention that we understand the critical importance of understanding the conflict dynamics and the risks in the areas where we're working. And that's where the role of civil society organizations and local NGOs and other community leaders becomes really critical. All of our programs require this conflict and risk assessment, both at the initiation of the program and across the project cycle. That being said, livelihood interventions, both short-term and longer-term, can have a very positive impact as people build their resilience. For example, with DRC, when we're able to link with the private sector across Kurdistan and the rest of Iraq, we do see a high success rate for people having longer-term impact on the livelihoods programs. We have about 85% of individuals that are linked into the private sector and stay on 10 months to 1 year after the initial job placement. And I just want to stress as maybe the last point on this discussion that livelihoods, when we focused on household and community assets, allow households to deal with crisis and social coexistence issues. And it's critical to promoting the future resilience, which is what we are trying to highlight through the Kirkuk program. In particular, community and social resilience, which we hope everybody can use to address future crises.
Well, thank you. In '94, I was managing a literacy program. I went to the class and I asked a lady, if I give you 10 dinars, Iraqi dinars, you go to the market buying 2 dinars rice, 3 dinars sugar, 1 or 2 extra items, how much money will remain with you? She told me, give me the money I can manage, and I know how much it will remain, and I will give it back to you. Everything is depending on the financing the resilience generally. So the question for the role of the local administration or governments, it is very important that we make some kind of promotion and marketing to what this forum will come out with some strategies and policies, and to make it a net of understanding. Everyone knows what resilience is, and especially it's a new term, it's a new approach to programming. It's very important to make it clear understanding for everyone. So financing is one of the areas that it is stuck on the activity of the government and the private sector as well. So we have to make some kind of, I agree with both from the center for the private sector, Chamber of Commerce, and our colleague in Kurdistan region as well. Regarding the importance of the private sector, we should have some programs in public-private partnership, BOT systems and other systems which integrate private sector much more in the to developmental issues. But still the banking issue is very important, how to make LCs, how to finance, especially we are in a financial crisis, and how the donors participate in bringing private and public together in doing some job. Last issue is that we have to have one vision on resilience, and terms of reference will be very clearly identified, and commitment from every people will be identified as well. And I agree with Ms. Lise, totally 100% reform agenda for the government should be addressed very clearly, especially if we stay with the current investment laws, as an example, in center and in Kurdistan region, we cannot do any FDI. It says in Kurdistan, in the border of the project, it is the responsibility of the investor. Up to the border of the project, this is the responsibility of the government. If the government have no finance to extend the services, how the project will be implemented? So I agree that reforms should be done in the current laws and regulations and legislations. Thank you so much.
أبدأ من دكتور آدم صراحة يعني لخص مشاكلنا وكأنه وصفها عراقيا يعني المواضيع الأربعة الذي تكلم عنه سيد آدم مسألة بناء جيش قوي يعني بعد التغيير بعد 2003 ومسألة اللامركزية ومكافحة الفساد والمصالح الوطنية هذه المرحلة الانتقالية من التغيير من حكومة وسلطة ديكتاتورية صرفة إلى ديمقراطية. يعني الديمقراطية والحكم الرشيد صراحة لا تأتي بين ليلة وضحاها. العراق بعد 2003 لحد الآن لم ينعم بالاستقرار الكافي لبناء هذه المفاصل الأربعة، ونحن نعد هذه المفاصل الأربعة المفاصل الأساسية، يعني نجاح في هذه المفاصل الأربعة المحور والعمود الفقري الأساسي في بناء الدولة المدنية الديمقراطية الفيدرالية التي نحن به، ومفاصله وبنوده مكتوبة في الدستور وموجودة في القوانين. فيما يخص اللامركزية بالذات في ملف النازحين، نحن تعاملنا بهذه اللامركزية. يعني الآن مثل محافظة مثل الدهوك التي تحتضن أكبر نسبة من النازحين، نحن حولنا له 80 مليون دولار وصرفت عن طريق المحافظة. يعني 80 مليون دولار رقم كبير أن تحوله حكومة اتحادية. يعني هناك وزارات ميزانيته ليست 80 مليون دولار في السنة. وهكذا الحال بالنسبة للمحافظات الأخرى. يعني عملنا ونجح هذا العمل. الآن الإيواء يعني 30,000 وحدة إيوائية عملنا به عن طريق هذه اللامركزية وموجودة الآن. هذه المفاصل الأربعة لبناء الدولة أثرت على النازحين أيضا عندما لم تكن كلها كاملة وشاملة وجيدة. يعني عدم وجود الجيش القوي الكافي في وقته، وحتى مشاكل اللامركزية ومكافحة الفساد، وفوق كل هذا المصالح الوطنية. نعم لدينا مشكلة في المصالح الوطنية. تركيزنا على النازحين صراحة أثر علينا كواجبنا كدولة تجاه اللاجئين. لكن اللاجئين في إقليم كردستان أكثرهم في إقليم كردستان، يعني أستطيع القول 95% منهم موجودين في إقليم كردستان، سواء لاجئين من تركيا أو سوريا أو إيران. جميعهم لديهم القابلية وهناك ظروف يعني اجتماعية من خلاله استطاعوا الدمج في المجتمع، بحيث أن النازح السوري في إقليم كردستان لا يحس بأنه ليس في وطنه، وذلك للانتماء القومي أو التشابه في الانتماء القومي. مسألة تعاون منظمات المجتمع الدولي وخاصة يعني منظمات الأمم المتحدة وبالأخص UNDP مع العراق الآن العمل مباشرة تحصل عن طريق المنظمات. يعني نحن لا نتدخل إداريا وماليا في شؤون المنظمات. منظمة UNHCR مثلا تذهب هي إلى الإدارة المحلية وتختار الأرض وتعمل مثلا مخيم، وهكذا بالنسبة للUNDP. يعني نحن لا نتدخل في أمورهم، نساعدهم يساعدونا، ولكن لا تدخل في شؤون البعض. من حيث التعامل مع الوضع الأخير في المخيمات والسيول والأمطار التي حصلت في بغداد وأطرافها، صراحة الحمد لله لم تحصل حالة وفاة بسبب الفيضانات، مع أن الحالة يعني في المخيمات أقصد، مع أن الحالة كانت صعبة. يعني كدولة وكوزارة قمنا بالواجب، يعني قمنا بإخلاء المخيمات وإنشالهم والذهاب بهم إلى أماكن آمنة، وبدأنا بترميم المخيمات، وبدأنا بنقل يعني أكثر من 500 عائلة إلى شقق سكنية حتى يعني نقيهم من البرد ومن الظروف القاسية. أخيرا مسألة استراتيجية الحكومة، يعني هذه ضرورية صراحة مثل ما قال الأخ الدكتور حبيب. نحن كحكومة استراتيجيتنا أن ندفع الأموال مباشرة للعائلة النازحة وهي تتصرف بما تريد. يعني من الصعب أنا لماذا أسانده وأدعمه بسلة غذائية، أحول له الأموال إلى حسابه الخاص فهو يعني يشتري أو يتصرف به كما يشاء. في هذه السنة حولنا يعني ما بين 550 إلى 600 مليار دينار، يعني 550 ألف عائلة استفادت من مساعدة الحكومة بمليون دينار لهذه السنة للأسف، لأن ليست لدينا أموال كافية حتى نعطي. يعني أنا كحكومة لو كانت لدينا الأموال الكافية، يعني بأن نستطيع دفع مثلا 400 ألف دينار شهريا، لكان الحالة الإنسانية أحسن بكثير، يعني لم تكن سيئة. يعني ولكن لا توجد هذه الأمور، يعني هذه مشكلتنا. نحن نعتبر هذا الدعم مؤقت، لأن استراتيجيتنا الأعلى واستراتيجيتنا الأساسية هي عودة العوائل إلى مناطقها. الآن أنا لا أستطيع أن كسياسة دولة أن أتبع سياسة بحيث أشجع هذا المواطن النازح من منطقته الأصلية بالتكيف الكامل مع المجتمع، وأن أجد له الحرفة الجيدة والسكن الجيد وإلى آخره، لأن هذا يوقيه في هذه المنطقة. واستراتيجيتنا هي عودة العوائل إلى هذه المنطقة، لأن التغيير الديموغرافي التي قد تحصل بسبب بقاء 3 ملايين عراقي في غير منطقتها هذه ليست استراتيجيتنا، ومشكلة كبيرة، لأن إذا لم تعد هذه العوائل إلى مناطقها المدمرة حاليا لا توجد هناك عوائل أخرى تعود إلى هذه المناطق، وبالتالي تبقى هذه المناطق خراب ولا تصبح ولا نحصل على إعادة الإعمار وإعادة الحياة لهذه المناطق. أخيرا يعني الشكر للجميع لاستماعكم صراحة، والشكر لكل الدول المانحة، والشكر للسيدة ليز وكل الإخوان والأخوات. يعني صراحة اهتمامكم بالوضع العراقي يفرحنا ويشجعنا بأن نستمر بقوة أكثر في معالجة المشاكل، ولا توجد يعني نحن كمسلمين وكعراقيين لدينا هذه القناعة بأن بعد كل عسر يسر، يعني إلا هناك نتيجة وحل لمشكلتنا، ونصبح كدول العالم الاعتيادية مستقرين وننعم بالخيرات. فالشكر.
I hope everyone joins me in thanking the distinguished members of the panel, and allow us to thank you for being with us this afternoon. Thank you.